And human rights are problematic. There's no single human right in the Bible. Crazy. It's all about obligations to others.
Creating a freer society.
How should we use a digital currency? How can we suddenly use it to ensure that we meet people's needs before my wants? And it's all doable. We're not having the conversation because the elites are controlling that conversation. And we have to start that conversation and start getting people engaged in the dialogue.
The other elite in our kind of culture, I suppose, there's the kind of government elite and the political elite who exist on one plane, the grandees of society and the academics and the people who kind of create taste. And then on the other side, we have this new elite, which is the kind of Silicon Valley elite. And I suppose there's something interesting there for you, perhaps, which is that there does seem to be a new strain of those disruptors within Silicon Valley who have decided to try and democratize their technology. I'm thinking here about kind of ChatGPT and the what seems to be an increasing urge towards giving technology to the masses for free so that there isn't this grave distinction between the haves and the have-nots in terms of this, what could be game-changing levels of automation, artificial intelligence, just actual knowledge that a platform like ChatGPT can offer. I suppose the question is, how do we incentivize more people to do that if they don't have particularly an economic reason to do it, which I think is true. It often tends to be real mavericks who decide to put their technology out into a kind of public sphere. How do we incentivize that economically? How do we make it so that when people make something brilliant, they want to share it?
Again, the civic trust, which is the concept that I've been talking about for a year or so, a couple of years, I think is the way you start thinking about how to create a system that allows people to be free of the profit focus, the focus on myself. So we have to redesign all our institutions, which are currently focused on the self, on shareholders, on people with power. And therefore we need to start small again in an agile way, start to build small units around the family where there is no focus on profit. Now, I'm not saying that you obviously have to support your family, you've got to support the community, but you have to start creating institutions that do genuinely liberate, i.e. they're free of the control of the centre, but they're based on morals and values. And therefore that will unleash people. And therefore, if we use a digital ledger, which suddenly shows that you make a whole load of people redundant, you're actually destroying their lives. You take jobs and send them to China. You're actually destroying whole communities, whole societies here. There's nowhere to hide. And that's why you need that transparency. You need it, but effectively you've got to make sure it's not abused. I think we're so used to that transparency being abused that we don't want it. But things like Bitcoin and the blockchain are fundamentally not creating accountability because nobody knows who owns Bitcoin. Yeah. And that's the opposite. It's the powers of Bitcoin. It's crazy. We want to know what people are doing, not because we're prying, because we want to ensure that people are looked after. And if there's, even within the family, if we want to make sure that the kids are being cared for and all of these things are happening, and that needs transparency, but it's not to invade their privacy. Currently, the trouble we know is that all our information is being hogged and being used for financial gain. And that's why we don't want to share it. But if we start to say, no, we're building around civic trusts, which are without shareholders, with an asset lock, so money is being used for purpose, then is there much to be scared about? And by the way, I think you can do it incrementally. The vision that I have is you start with a default system whereby people can opt out from publicly putting their details on board with a justification. And I think over time you start to see that the reason why people are scared is because they've been forced into believing we live in a meritocracy. If you're not successful, it's your own fault. And therefore hide the fact that you're not successful because it's your fault, but it's not your fault. The fault is the system. So I'm convinced that we need to start giving people the confidence that it's not their fault that they can't buy a house. It's not their fault they can't get a meaningful job. It's the fault of the system. And therefore we need to redesign a system around transparency, but transparency based on values and morality, not transparency based on hiding what's going on in a blockchain where you don't know which is pseudonymous or anonymous. No, we want to know that people are good people, that people can emulate them. And I think that's doable.
A lot of these kind of players in this game, though, especially those who invest in Bitcoin and that sort of thing, have grown up in the age of internet anonymity. They are so used to, I would say this is definitely true of my generation, absolutely used to, as standard, the idea that you have the right to anonymity. I just wonder how that is going to play out going forward, because it doesn't seem like something that you can put the brake on. Once you start rolling with anonymity and you allow it to proliferate and become effectively embodied in every person in the world, which is everyone has the right to act anonymously online, how does that affect human interaction? I can't imagine it's going anywhere good.
You've got to build a model and show people that it actually works. If you're a thing or a number, you're not human. But
this used to be very understood. It used to be part of the original kind of old socialist movement. The old left would say, the whole point is that I'm not a market unit. That's the whole point. I'm not a thing to be sold. But now it seems that people who would consider themselves socialist or left wing are very happy for their data to be sold online for the profit of a Silicon Valley billionaire, and really have no qualms about that. They tweet constantly for the profit of Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg.
Because they go native. The point is that as you said, the elites are very clever at channeling these weaknesses into supporting them. So they say that this idea, it's human rights. Now, the beauty of a covenant, it's not about rights. It's about obligations. I have an obligation to care for other people. And human rights are problematic. There's no single human right in the Bible. Crazy. It's all about obligations to others. And therefore, you convince people that you have the right to privacy. And that's what they should be looking for, because it suits you, because you're making money from that privacy. If you start saying, 1 minute, no, we want to change the way people think and start to recognize that we love each other, we care for each other. And I'm proud of the fact that I care for others, and I'm not hiding anywhere. I'm a human being, and that's why fundamentally it's a mind shift change. But it's the change we're talking about away from my wants trumping other people's needs is also a massive shift. But you've got to do it incrementally. You've got to start the dialogue. It's this kind of dialogue where there's not much dialogue going on. There's far too many. I hate sitting on platforms where you've got 3 or 4 people who each give their own.
Talk across each other.
They each has. It's not a dialogue. What we're doing now is genuine dialogue. And the young people, we need that dialogue. And these fundamental questions, what is privacy about? I'm convinced it's obligations. I am obliged. If the information that's used is there to ensure that I meet my obligations to you, and it's not about my rights, then I'm automatically considering about you. So the beauty of obligations is I'm not fighting you, because my obligation is to care for you and everybody else. Your obligation is to care for me and everyone else. We're actually supporting each other. Whereas rights, immediately, it's my right, it's about me. And that's effectively contractual, not covenantal. So this back to where we started, this concept of covenant, I don't think privacy, I don't think rights they're contractual, they're not covenantal.
The obsession with rights does seem to have led us to where we are today, where there does seem to become more and more tribalistic view of us versus them. It's always that you are either a victim or an aggressor, and you can distinguish everyone by someone who supports or denies you your rights. And that can be the way you lay out your kind of map of how you see the moral fabric of your society, which I think has brought us to kind of this very strange place we are today. But I suppose another thing that I do have to pick up on there is, how do we avoid this covenantal society becoming just as tribal as the society we're in, because in a different sense? Because I suppose one of the values of the idea of rights is that they can kind of be applied to everyone equally, and you don't even have to know the person or particularly care about them to extend to them an idea of rights. Whereas obligation under a kind of covenantal structure feels, correct me if I'm wrong, more personal, in the sense that you do need to have some degree of call it love, call it a sense of social responsibility. It's more than just saying, look, okay, yeah, you have this right, but that's it. And I have it's very cold. There's a kind of coldness, I think, to the idea of rights, whereas the obligation of the covenant feels actually more warm. But that warmth, I think, could lead us to a place where we do have pockets, tribal pockets of people who look after each other because they have natural affinity. And you see what I'm getting at here. And then what we have is a situation where we can no longer have this kind of brilliant, multicultural, diverse society because everyone will turn inwards towards the people who they feel most similar to because those are the easiest people to look after.